right, y'all. Welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I am the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and I've recorded more than 5,000 interviews going back to 2003, all of which are available at scotthorton.org. You can also sign up for the podcast feed. The full archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, introducing Jacob Sullum, senior editor at Reason Magazine and nationally syndicated columnist, too. And he is covering the trial of Derek Chauvin, the cop from Minneapolis, for the death of George Floyd last year. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing great. Appreciate you joining us on the show again here. And appreciate you covering this trial. I saw that it was on. I watched a very small portion of it yesterday during lunchtime, but that's because I knew I could count on you, Jacob, to catch us up. Where are we at right now in the trial in terms of prosecution case, defense, or jury deliberations, or all those things?
Well, the prosecution is still presenting its case. Yesterday, a paramedic testified and confirmed that Floyd was dead by the time they got there, basically. There was some ambiguity on that point. I mean, it certainly seemed to the bystanders and people who watched the videos that he died while he was being restrained in the prone position, and Chauvin had his knee on his neck. But the paramedic confirmed that point, so that was significant. There was also testimony about Floyd's drug use, which the prosecution is probably it's trying to get ahead of this because the defense is going to argue, already has argued in the opening statement, that drugs, if they didn't in themselves kill Floyd, that they played a role in his death. He had consumed black market tablets labeled as Percocet, but that actually contained fentanyl and methamphetamine. And the autopsy confirmed that was in his blood. And so the defense is going to argue that that was largely responsible for his death. And the prosecution, I think, is trying to show that since Floyd was a regular opioid user, that he had enough tolerance that the amount of fentanyl he consumed would not have killed him in itself. And I think that's accurate. I mean, if you look at the blood levels in the autopsy report, they're not very high. They're toward the low end of what has been found in people who died of opioid-related causes. So I think it's pretty clear that it wasn't an overdose per se, but the defense may still argue that the fact that he took those drugs increased the stress on his cardiovascular system. He was already not very healthy, and that he died as a result of those causes, the underlying health conditions plus the drugs. Of course, he was under tremendous. You can't ignore the fact that he was under tremendous stress because of the way the police were treating him. So the defense's argument that cardiovascular disease, adrenaline pumping through him, the stress from the drugs and so on, that caused his death, does not eliminate the possibility that what the police did to him was a crucial factor as well. And if he would have survived but for what the police did, and in particular, but for what Chauvin did, then that means that Chauvin caused his death legally, that it was the but-for cause of his death. And then you have additional questions about Chauvin's state of mind and the other elements of the various crimes that he's charged with. But in terms of causation, the prosecution even could concede that the drugs played some role in his death, but it still doesn't mean that Chauvin is off the hook.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, so on that first point about whether he was already dead or not, I think we've heard over and over again that he died in the ambulance on the way there, that there was some kind of electrical activity, this, that, the other thing. They were still trying to save him for a while, but at what point did it fail? Can you clarify that?
Well, they did try to resuscitate him later in the ambulance, and they did not succeed. So he had no pulse repeatedly during his restraint. He had no pulse. At least twice, Chauvin was told he has no detectable pulse. Paramedics came; they couldn't find a pulse either. There was no sign. There were no signs of life. So I think it is fair to say that he was dead at that point, even though they subsequently tried to resuscitate him.
I see. So in other words, he was just pronounced dead on the way there. At that point, they gave up at some point trying.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. When the point at which somebody is pronounced dead isn't necessarily the point at which he actually died.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I mean, I think.
But in other words, though, it's not like he had been knocked completely out, but was still alive. He actually was not alive by the time that the cops got off of him.
That was the paramedics' impression. Yes.
Okay. Which, hey, that's what I saw in the video too. But I think there'd been some mixed messages about exactly when he died. So
yeah, I mean, I think the paramedics' testimony clarified that point. Mm-hmm. And yes, so, I'm not sure. I mean, you can still argue either way, whether he died at the scene or died in the ambulance. You still have this dispute about which factors precisely, killed him. But I think it's totally implausible to say that what Chauvin did was irrelevant, right? I mean, even if you buy the defense's argument about various underlying factors, you can't ignore what was going on. And
you're saying that this guy was not dying of a drug overdose at the time that the cop put his knee on his. And here's a very important point. You say what Chauvin did. Well, what exactly did he do? Because I saw one thing going around on right-wing Twitter yesterday saying, see, his knee is not on the guy's neck, it's on his back. And that's your reasonable doubt right there. They were putting so much weight on this whole knee on the neck argument, and yet here's a screenshot from the video of one of the other cops' body cams, something like that, and maybe even from the witness video. And so what difference does that make, or does it?
Well, it makes some difference because the prosecution is arguing that he was asphyxiated, that in fact that his breathing was so obstructed that he suffered an anoxic seizure. And of course, the defense denies that. They say his breathing was not obstructed. He was not having trouble getting oxygen. So that the position of the knee is relevant in that sense. I think it's quite clear from the bystander video that his knee was on the neck. I mean, his attorney, in his opening statement, described the knee as being on his shoulder, back. But of course, your shoulder's right next to your neck. So if you put your knee on somebody's shoulder, it can be on their shoulder and their neck at the same time.
And in fact, the picture I saw was from a cop who's further back, I guess, holding down his legs or holding down the next cop in line or whatever. And yes, the knee is on the back, but it's not precluding the idea that it's also on his neck too. And
the bystander video, which is shot, in front of Floyd's head, it seems very clear from that the knee is on the neck.
Mm-hmm. Now here's the thing, though, too, isn't it the case that a lot of times cops suffocate people to death by holding them flat on their chest and compressing them so that the asphyxiation is not a block in the throat? It's the inability of their lungs to expand, their chest cavity to expand, to take in new air. And then oftentimes these people, the last words they hear are, if you can say you can't breathe, then you can breathe. And then they die.
Well, we heard that in this case. Yes, there have been similar cases where people died while being restrained in a prone position on their stomachs, not with a knee on their neck. And there was a case in Dallas, in fact, where somewhat similar circumstances where this guy
called the cops to come and help him.
Yes, he was having a panic attack. He was taking psychiatric medication. He said he hadn't taken it that day. He also apparently had taken cocaine, which the police knew. And this guy was basically freaking out. He wasn't threatening anybody or hurting anybody. And so in an attempt to help him, they ended up killing him because they pinned him to the ground face down. He was clearly, if you look at the video, he clearly was having trouble breathing. He kept turning his head to the side, which is similar to what Floyd doing. And yeah, so it wasn't necessary. In that case, there was no knee to his neck. You can still make it hard for somebody to breathe, even if you don't have your knee on the neck. So yeah, that's
so the operative point here is
it's not crucial to show that. I mean, what the prosecution says is that Chauvin had his knee on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes, did not move from that position, despite what the bystanders were saying, that his life was in danger, despite what Floyd was saying, that he couldn't breathe, despite one of his colleagues, Thomas Lane, repeatedly said that they should roll him onto his side.
Repeatedly, he said that?
Yes, twice, according to the prosecutors. And even after he was not responsive, they say he was still resisting. And this came up in the Dallas case too. What the police call resisting may just be somebody panicking because they're afraid they're going to be suffocated, right? And so they're going to struggle in order to avoid suffocation, and the police may interpret that as resistance. And that's what it looks like in the video of Floyd's arrest. And in any case, at a certain point, he was no longer responsive. So he wasn't even complaining anymore. He wasn't moving, wasn't complaining. And Chauvin still kept in that position. He was still pinned to the ground. Even after he was told there was no pulse, he was still pinning. Even after the ambulance arrived. He was still pinned
Jacob,
to the ground.
so here's my concern, though, is, not that it's deliberate or whatever, but it sounds like possibly the prosecutor is setting this up too narrowly, where if the defense can make a juror believe that, look, he really was more on his shoulder than his neck, that might work because they're not saying one way or the other, he suffocated him, he should have backed off. At some point after crying for his mom, the guy obviously, stopped moving at all, this kind of thing. But just on that narrow point of where exactly was his knee. And if the prosecution is saying, look, whether he suffocated him by holding his chest cavity from expanding or by blocking his throat, it's kind of hard to say. But either way, it seems like that would be a more compelling argument. And I guess I'm worried that it sounds like maybe they're defining it too narrowly, where the defense could create some doubt just on exactly the position of the knee, whether 1 or 2 degrees to the left or the right.
Right. Yes, I don't think that it should be focused that narrowly, because the crucial question is would he have still been alive had they not treated him this way?
But how is is the prosecution, are my fears misplaced or not in terms of the way the prosecution is framing it?
It may be. They haven't presented specific medical testimony on that point yet. But in the opening statement, yes, one of the prosecutors in the opening statement said he was said there were, you could see involuntary movements that were indicative of an anoxic seizure. And he said that something like this, the very life was squeezed out of him. Now, of course, the very life was squeezed out of him. That's consistent with simply being pinned to the ground in that position, and you don't necessarily have to have a knee on the neck. So I'm not sure that they're going to insist that's the crucial point. They shouldn't. And I mean, the autopsy report described the cause of death as cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression. So they did mention neck compression. Did not find that he was asphyxiated specifically, but the basic thrust of this, and even based on the description the defense is arguing of the cause of death, is the basic thrust is that this use of force was crucial in causing his death. That if it hadn't happened, he would still have been alive. That's the crucial point. And so, yeah, I don't think you have to show exactly how long the knee was, where exactly the knee was or how long it was on his neck. They say more than 9 minutes. The crucial point is that he was kept in this position, pinned to the ground for an unreasonable length of time.
Hey, y'all, let me tell you about the Libertarian Institute's latest book, What Social Animals Owe to Each Other, by our executive editor, the great Sheldon Richman. For decades, Richman has been explaining libertarianism to the left from the left. He makes a strong case that any honest liberal, progressive, or leftist actually should be libertarians, since in fact it is freedom itself that provides what y'all want. Richmond argues the case for liberty and peace, the human spirit and social cooperation, for true liberalism, libertarianism, against the corrupt forces of statism, corporatism, and violence. What Social Animals Owe to Each Other by Sheldon Richman. Now available at libertarianinstitute.org/books. Hey guys, Scott Horton here for Mike Swanson's great book, The War State. It's about the rise of the military-industrial complex and the power elite after World War II, during the administrations of Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, and Jack Kennedy. It's a very enlightening take on this definitive era on America's road to world empire. The War State by Mike Swanson. Find it in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org. All right, now, you write in your piece at Reason here from, I'm not sure if you have an update or not. I'm sorry. I have this one from yesterday or the day before, I guess. I think yesterday, where they're saying, well, look, all the protesters screaming that, hey, you're killing a guy, well, that distracted them. And that if only they had been left in peace, then they wouldn't have killed the guy. But they were so busy, worried that, I guess, the angry people on the sidewalk were about to kill them or something, that they had to protect themselves and divide their attention from what they were doing.
Yes. I mean, it is a puzzling argument, actually, because they, on the one hand, the defense is saying Chauvin did everything by the book. He did everything the way he was trained to do it. Couldn't have done things better. But then they also are saying, but he was distracted. Well, why is that? It's not relevant that he was distracted unless he screwed up in some way, right? I mean, the fact that he was distracted doesn't get you anywhere unless you're using it as an excuse for something he either did or failed to do. Now, what it looks like the defense is saying that they would have rendered aid because they referred to they were distracted from the care. Let's say the police were distracted from the care of Floyd, which suggests that maybe they would have rendered aid had they not been distracted by the angry bystanders. But it doesn't. If they actually listen to what the angry bystanders were saying, right, that certainly should have called their attention to the fact that this guy's life is in danger, that he didn't need to be restrained in that position any longer, that he was not resisting. That he was having trouble breathing and so on. Right. So
I mean, in other words, the bystanders are pleading with the police. He's dying. Please. They're saying,
you're going to suffocate him. You're making it hard for him to breathe. You should check for a pulse. There was a firefighter there who was also a paramedic, who was one of the bystanders. And she was saying you should check for a pulse. You got to check for a pulse. I think she even offered to examine him. Of course, they wouldn't let her anywhere near him. So this alleged distraction was actually calling their attention to the danger of what they were doing. So it's a strange kind of argument, in my view. I don't think it really helps his case.
Mm-hmm. All right, now here's the thing, though. If a regular human being does this to somebody, it's an entirely different set of laws and standards that apply. In this case, this cop only needs to say that it was reasonable. As you said, his defense is already saying, look, he was trained to put his knee on people's necks. How is he supposed to know that you're not supposed to do that? He was trained that way. And so it's somebody else's fault if it's anybody's fault. And so, and the threshold for what's reasonable is what's reasonable to a cop, not what's reasonable to a regular person. And the cops all agree that they were trained to do that. So what's the problem?
Right. Well, of course, I mean, the crucial difference is that an ordinary person doesn't have the right to just grab somebody and handcuff them, and that's kidnapping, So the crucial point is that the police have the authority to do that because they were arresting him for this misdemeanor, passing the fake $20 bill. Once they were doing
that's one distinction, but also they can say, for example, if they shoot someone, well, I felt fear and it was reasonable that I felt fear. But if you shoot somebody, you got to do a lot better than that. You have to have had absolutely no choice.
Well, the standard is supposed to be the same for that. The use of deadly force in self-defense, it's not enough for either a cop or anybody else to show that they were afraid. They have to show that the fear was reasonable in the circumstances. But in the case of so they're taking him into custody, and he's and by the way, he was calm. He was intermittently calm, and he was calm up until the point they were trying to put him in the car. At which point he seems to be having a panic attack. He says he's claustrophobic. He can't breathe. Can he ride in the front? Right. And so he's resisting the cops as they do that. Once he gets out of the car, it's not clear whether he actually like pushed himself out of the car or the cops pulled him out of the car, but he ends up, and he actually says, something like, let me lie on the ground, or I'll lie on the ground, meaning let me just calm down. He probably did not have in mind lying on the ground in the way he ended up. But the question is, yes, he resisted them while they were trying to put him in the car. But then once he was out of the car, could he have just sat there in handcuffs and calmed down? Right? I mean, we don't know because they didn't even try that. So the question is the test for the use of force is whether it's reasonable at each particular point where they continue to use it. Right? So is he posing such a threat to them that this use of force is necessary? And even if he initially resisted, for sure, when he was getting into the police car. They say he was resisting, although it's not visible in the video, that he was resisting even after he was pinned to the ground. But once that he was not resisting anymore, there was no justification for that use of force. And so that's basically the argument, is what threat did he pose while they were doing that to him that justified that use of force?
Yeah. And after he's already cuffed and it's just 3 cops or 4 cops holding him down?
It was 3 cops holding him down. The 4th cop was
standing
on
guard,
crowd control.
Right.
And it's, he's the one who said, this is why you don't do drugs, kids, and kept just parroting what the other cops were saying, which is, as long as you can talk, it means you're breathing fine. There's no need to worry. That did not, needless to say, that did not satisfy the bystanders. So they thought that it was obviously excessive use of force, and that the cop who was talking to them should have intervened. And in fact, he's charged with aiding and abetting, along with the 2 other cops who were assisting Chauvin. So we'll see if his failure to intervene, can be enough to convict him of that charge. But for sure, it was a moral failure. If you watch the video of the way he reacted to the bystanders, not taking their concerns seriously at all, so that goes to that whole argument about the angry bystanders and how they were a distraction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and it goes to show about how they think about the citizens, that we're all the people on the sidewalk are, like a bunch of Iraqi enemy combatants or something. They're not the people that they're sworn to protect, along with Mr. Floyd, who they're killing. But they're these people to be lectured and disregarded. And as you said, when he addresses them, it's this patronizing crap about drug use and all this.
Yes, and if you watch that video, and you'll see they're not violent, they're not threatening.
They're pleading. That's
concerned, and they are, and one of them who testified the other day, he calls Chauvin, and also as a Tao, the officer who was on crowd control, a bum, right? You're a bum, and various other names too. Actually, you might have thought harsher names were appropriate, but yeah. So he calls them names. He says you're failing. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. You're violating, your duty. Those are the kinds of things they were saying. So it wasn't like it was an incipient riot, and that the people were about to, attack the police. Right. If anything, they were trying to help Floyd. What looks to most people like valid criticism is often perceived by police as a threat.
Of course. All right. Now, on the question of drugs, I guess I had seen reports saying, he had a massive amount of these drugs in his system. And everybody knows I get right-wingers on Twitter sometimes. Everybody knows he died of a drug overdose, you big dummy. But you say, no, actually, the testimony here is that it was a very low percent. I don't know how they measure that in quantity in blood. But
yeah, I don't have the numbers right here in front of me, but I did write about it at the time. The autopsy report shows the blood levels.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, they're not that high. I mean, if you look at studies where they measured fentanyl blood levels in people who died after taking fentanyl, they tend to be much higher. This was on the low end. It's not that there's never been a death where the blood level was that low, but it's on the low end of the range. And I think the prosecution is trying to establish that he had developed tolerance to fentanyl because he was using it on a regular basis,
right.
Which would make it even less likely that he could have died from that amount.
Now, isn't there a thing about, I don't know all the legal stuff, but something about like you take them as they come kind of thing, so that if some guy has a brain injury and you don't know that and you punch him and it kills him, that's still murder. And because it is what it is. So even if this guy's on drugs and that means it's easier to suffocate him, so you still suffocated him. It's not really a mitigating circumstance under the law, right?
In fact,
no?
I mean, I would argue to the contrary. I mean, I just wrote a piece about this yesterday that, when Chauvin is defending his actions to one of the bystanders after Floyd has been taken away, he says he's a big guy. He seemed to be on drugs, and we had to subdue him. So he clearly thought Floyd was acting this way. He was this panicky kind of way because he was on drugs. I mentioned the other officer had the same impression. A third officer, the one who said he should be rolled onto his side, talked about excited delirium, right? The dangers of he was referring to holding, keeping somebody on his stomach, pinned to the ground when he is experiencing excited delirium. So the fact that Chauvin believed Floyd was under the influence of drugs actually makes his decisions even more questionable, because he shouldn't. The position he was holding him in was especially dangerous for somebody who had taken drugs, and he should have known that. With the other possible contributing factors like his underlying disease or whatever, again it comes down to, would he just have died of that? Would he? If the police had never tried to arrest him, would he be dead? I mean, that's basically the question. And or was there use of force, the but-for cause of his death? You can only get so far by arguing that there were other contributing factors.
So tell me this real quick. Is there anything that I'm missing in terms of the defense side, or say like conservative media saying that, because I saw where Andrew McCarthy was saying, see, he was resisting arrest and this kind of thing. I mean, is there much to what they're saying that we haven't really touched on here so far?
Well, I think he was resisting arrest, certainly when they were putting him in the car.
Right.
There is a question. The defense is claiming he was still resisting even when he was pinned to the ground. I don't see that. I would like to see what additional evidence they have of that. If it is only that he was moving his head and one of his shoulders in an effort to breathe, and repeatedly saying he couldn't breathe and begging them to stop, if that's what counts as resisting, they might even count what the prosecution describes as involuntary movements brought on by lack of oxygen, as if that is perceived as an attempt to, as a kind of resistance or an attempt to assault them or something. I wouldn't be surprised if they did that. And then in which case you would say the defense would be saying he was resisting, look at the way he's moving. And the prosecution is saying that's an involuntary movement caused by an anoxic seizure. Right. So these things can be interpreted very differently. But I don't see in the video him posing a violent threat at the point where he's pinned to the ground.
Yeah. And by the way, has anybody mentioned yet that these two men knew each other from being guards at the strip club or whatever it was?
I don't know if that came up in the trial yet.
Okay.
But I don't, as far as I can tell, that's not relevant. I mean, it doesn't look like there was any bad blood or grudge between them or anything like that. But we'll see if either side thinks it's relevant. It may come up.
Well, apparently they weren't friends. The cop could have said, "Hey, buddy, it's me, your old friend from the strip club. Let's figure out how to de-escalate this crisis here." But that was apparently not one of the relevant options.
Yes, I mean, look. So you said de-escalation. That was really the issue. The guy's freaking out when they're trying to put him in a police car. How do you respond to that? And if he was prepared to be calm once he was out of the car, could they have just let him sit there in handcuffs for a while he calmed down? Right, that was an option that they didn't explore. And then even assuming that they needed to pin him, which is not clear to me that they did, at a certain point they should have reconsidered that.
Yeah.
And instead of continuing to hold him in that position for more than 9 minutes.
That's certainly when he's sitting there begging for his mother. He's clearly dying. Come on. Anybody can watch that video. It's online all over the place.
Right, and the way the police respond is very dismissive, right? That this is he's just exaggerating. He's just being melodramatic, that sort of thing. Whereas the bystanders saw it very differently. I guess I should say, I mean, I've seen some people on Twitter saying there's no way he's guilty of first-degree murder, which of course he's not charged with first-degree murder. He's charged with 2 different kinds of murder and 1 kind of manslaughter, and the elements are somewhat different. The second-degree murder charge, which is the most serious one, says that he Chauvin assaulted Floyd, and while committing that felony, unintentionally killed him. Right, so it's a kind of felony murder charge. There's unintentional murder, but it happened as a result of this other crime that he committed. In this case, an assault. Mm-hmm. So that's one of them. Another one is third-degree murder, which says that what Chauvin did, he committed an act that was eminently dangerous to other people, and it reflects a depraved mind without regard for human life. And that was the charge on which the police officer who shot that woman in the chest after she called 911, another Minneapolis police officer, that he was convicted of that charge. So that's a possibility. But in fact, even though they're rated differently, those 2 charges have the same presumptive sentence. So it really would not have much of a practical difference which of those 2 the jury chose. The third possibility is the second-degree manslaughter, which says that he caused Floyd's death by culpable negligence that created an unreasonable risk, and that he consciously took the chance that he would cause great bodily harm. Right. So again, it's not like he intentionally killed him, but there was a risk that, and he recklessly took this chance that he would cause great bodily harm. That to me seems like an easy fit to the details of the case, while there may be questions about the other ones. But that charge has a substantially shorter presumptive sentence. I mean, I don't know, if I were on the jury, I might be inclined toward that charge, to tell you the truth, because it's the one that most clearly seems to fit. But then the resulting sentence people may not be happy with it.
Yeah. Well, if he's convicted at all, it'd be a miracle, but I guess, I bet if anybody knows offhand, it would be you. What's the percentages on cops convicted of taking somebody's life under one charge or another?
Oh, I don't know have the actual percentage, but it's basically almost never. I mean, they're almost never charged, and then when they are charged, they're usually not convicted.
And then, I mean, obviously there's a lot of cases where somebody's shooting at them and they shoot back, but I just saw this thing. I really should get these people on the show. They did this study where they showed that the vast majority of people killed by cops were just going about their day before they got engaged with the cops, pulled over for a traffic citation or some kind of thing. In other words, they were not in the middle of a violent felony at the time that the cops showed up, robbing a store or killing somebody or whatever.
That may be true. I haven't seen that.
Oh, yeah.
But in this case,
I should have my footnote when I bring up things like that. But yeah, it just came out.
Well, look, in this case, Floyd did apparently commit a crime. There was a real victim in it, but it was a very petty crime. How much does a pack of cigarettes cost? Whatever, Oh, I guess he got changed for the 20, right? So at most, this is a $20 crime, a misdemeanor, nonviolent, and I think that should matter, right? People want to paint him as some kind of dangerous criminal. But this is really a petty crime, and police should be taking that into account when they're deciding how much of a danger is this guy, how much is it worth it,
Yeah. Well, it's really ironic, too.
This kind of force.
It's really ironic, too, that last May, you know how much money they were creating on May 25th? And the same day he expanded the money supply by $20? Without license,
Yeah. Well,
this happened to be a period of quantitative easing. I don't know.
I suppose you could see it that way. So yeah, I don't. And the whole thing about the drug use cuts. I guess mostly in the defense's favor, people would see it that way. But it doesn't make him a bad guy. I know people tend to think that, but the fact that he used these drugs doesn't make him a bad person or a dangerous person. This often comes up in these cases where someone's killed by the police. Usually a black guy is killed by police, and they'll say, well, he was on drugs, or he was a drug user, as if that makes the police use of force okay. Mm-hmm. And it really doesn't. It is.
Yeah. Well, it could be part of an important story. Like the guy had smoked a bunch of PCP and he beat up 6 cops before we got there or something. But wait, he took some opiate pills? It doesn't sound like that would make him anything but happier and more mellow and less aggressive, if anything.
Yeah. And look, if you watch the struggle in the car, it's not like he's trying to hurt these officers.
Yeah,
right?
he's just panicking. Right?
In fact, he's panicking and he doesn't want to be put in the car, right? And the question is, how do you deal with that, right? It's a legitimate arrest. The guy doesn't want to get in the car. Is there some way short of what they did to deal with that? And I think there are alternatives, and we're probably going to hear more about that probably next week, because today is a short day for the trial. But already we had one of the sergeants, former sergeant from the Minneapolis Police Department, testify yesterday that they should have stopped restraining him that way once he was no longer resisting. And it's very clear at the point where he's not responsive and not saying anything anymore that he's not resisting at that point, at least. And he said he explicitly said they should not have continued to restrain him. How
many more minutes was it at that point after he went limp?
I believe they were saying something like 4.5 minutes. The prosecution.
So yeah, half the time then, out of 9, right?
Yeah, nearly half the time.
My God,
and they're gonna have a dispute as to whether there was continued resistance on the ground, but then there's also the dispute about when any movement at all stopped, right? So, at that point, they're clear. If there's no movement at all, you can't. There is no resistance, very clearly. Even when there is movement, you can argue about, was that resistance or is that just him trying not to suffocate? So I think we'll hear more about that.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, if it's all right with you, I'd love to have you back on maybe next week or the week after to get a wrap on this. But I really appreciate your great journalism on this story.
Well, thank you.
All right, you guys, that is Jacob Sullum at Reason Magazine, senior editor over there. And I'm sorry, the one I have is Derek Chauvin. Chauvin argues that his use of force was appropriate and did not kill George Floyd. Was there another one after that yet?
Yeah, yesterday I wrote about Chauvin's belief that Floyd was intoxicated at the time and whether that actually helps his case.
I see. Oh, I see that
That
here
was,
now.
yeah.
Derek Chauvin's belief that George Floyd was intoxicated does not help his case. If drugs played a role in Floyd's death, the prone restraint only compounded that danger, right? And we talked about that. So, okay, great. Well, listen, thank you so much again, Jacob. Really appreciate it.
Sure. Take care.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.